Hey everybody, welcome back. Masonic history has a proud tradition of using art and illustration to show the truth and the history and the glory of what we know and how we observe and how we understand so much within the craft. We also get to know a lot of our historical figures through such imagery. However, not all this imagery is historically accurate. Well, some brothers that we have on the show this evening went to some really deep lengths of making sure that a excellent portrait of Prince Hall was historically accurate and pleasing for years to come. We got an excellent show based around this evening, hoping to get a lot of questions for you guys, really dig in on this topic of just who Prince Hall was, how is this historically accurate, why does that matter, and where does it go from here? So stick with us. Right after this, we have an excellent show on historical light.
Welcome back to the Historical Light Masonic Podcast, dedicated to illuminating our past and bringing our Masonic history to light since 2016. And now, enjoy the show.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Historical Light, live right here on both Facebook, YouTube, Stitch, all kinds of stuff. So happy to have you guys with us. Seeing we got a bunch of you joining in right now. Definitely let us know in the comments that you're watching. If you got comments and questions throughout this, throw those in there, and we'll try to get all those answered for you. My name's Alex Powers. Of course, I'm your host of Historical Light. We have some excellent guests this evening with us. I'm just going the order we have on our screen here. Brother Ken Upchurchcollins, Brother Ryan Flynn, and Brother Oscar Alleyne. My apologies. Brothers, if you don't mind, I want to go around and have you kind of further introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and your Masonic experience a little bit. Brother Ken, if you don't mind. Oh, hold on, brother. We got you muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Gotcha.
Outstanding. Thanks so much for having me on, Alex. I'm Ken Upchurchcollins. I'm a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. My lodge is Tuxedo Lodge number 431 out of Fairfield, Alabama. My Masonic journey is unlike some people's, I actually came in through a clandestine organization, which I did not know I was joining a clandestine organization. And in terms of family history, I had an uncle who happened to be Ezra Cherry, who was the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Indiana. I go down to school. I happened to call the Grand Lodge of Alabama and say, I'm looking for a lodge. They say, you need to go down to 6th Street at 6th Avenue South and join a lodge there. And I happened to meet a gentleman, and he was wearing a big Masonic t-shirt, a giant belt buckle, brought me in, and lo and behold, I was in a clandestine organization. Long story short, I ended up learning about clandestine Freemasonry and getting healed in the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. And we can easily say the rest is history. And I serve as the Grand Historian for the Grand Lodge of Alabama, Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama now, and one of the ardent opponents of clandestine Freemasonry.
Rightfully so, man. Thank you so much for being here. And you guys got an intro to live up to there. I mean, how can you top that, right? We really appreciate you having here, brother. Brother Ryan Flynn, if you wouldn't mind introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Flynn. I'm the District Deputy Grand Education Officer for the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire. The way I came into Masonry was a little backwards. I had studied art history and art, and I learned quite a bit about Renaissance architecture, and somehow it came up. And I had a friend who had joined. He didn't really talk about it that much, and finally I started looking into it, and it sounded like something that I wanted to be a part of, and I was very fortunate enough to join a lodge that gave me a bunch of attention and pointed me in the right direction. And 2 years after I joined, I did my first Masonic art, and it has not stopped since. It's kind of overwhelming my wife now, so it's where I'm going now. But it's been good. I've been a Mason for 12 years now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Brother Oscar Allen, thank you so much for being here. If you wouldn't mind to let everyone know just who you are.
Hi, my name is Oscar Allen. I follow Ken Collins around in a way of making sure we don't get ourselves into trouble. Actually, it's ironic you said, how do you top that? Ken and I have a very similar story as far as our origins in Freemasonry. I, in college, was studying about the history of fraternal organizations in America when I was joining my college fraternity, and lo and behold, ended up joining a lodge in Queens, New York, and was a member there for 14 years, only to find out that it was not a regular, it wasn't a recognized, it was a clandestine lodge. And another 2 years after that, trying to figure out how to make myself righteous. I ended up knocking on the doors of the Grand Lodge of New York, and extensively just starting all over again, as they would say, and really immersed myself so much in Freemasonry that I became an ardent, studier of research and education, speaking across several continents, and also just recently being the past elected junior Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge State of New York for about 3 years, given the pandemic, give or take a year or two. So it's a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to be amongst my brethren.
Fantastic. Well, we thank all of you for being here. I'm super stoked to get into the conversation this evening. Just before we do that, we want to give you guys an opportunity to join us here at Historical Light, help us continue the mission and keep growing strong. Been doing this since 2016, loving every minute of it, and your guys' support helps us do that. If you're interested in joining the Historical Light team, you can definitely do so at the website, historicallight.com/support. But with that, we got a really, really juicy episode this evening. So we got brought around this conversation because of Brother Ryan Flynn's art, which has been phenomenal. He's been really an asset to the craft over the last several years. We see these wonderful pieces come out that really spark in conversation on a wide scale, that people are able to relate to those visual mediums, and that conversation gets started through a lot of people that I don't think ever would have those conversations in the first place. So that has been beautiful. Brother Ryan Flynn did a painting recently of Brother Prince Hall, and went to the extent of wanting it to be a very historically accurate painting. And that's where these brothers here come in, helping make sure that every bit of this painting had deep meaning and historical accuracy behind it. So I think it's obligatory here for people joining in that may not be fully up to who Prince Hall is, his legacy, and why he's so important both historically and today. If you brothers wouldn't mind, just to give a quick rundown about our brother Prince Hall.
Oscar, go ahead. Go. I'll talk about the Colombian. I'll talk about it.
I make pretty pictures.
So, brother Prince Hall, if you look at things from the American Freemasonry perspective, there are key pillars from a historical perspective as to who are, if you want to call them, our patron saints of Freemasonry from American context. So Prince Hall is one of those key foundational individuals whose names would essentially outlast Freemasonry, if you want to say it in that context. He and 15 gentlemen essentially were able to have the first lodge primarily of men of color in Boston in the 1700s. And as a result of that, not only was he a very strong abolitionist, he was very much into education. He was very much in tune with current affairs at the time, and was very open in his conversations and his petitions and his trying to really fight for the plight of people of color in Boston and in the northern states at that time. And his legacy is one that, by virtue of being kind of the spirit behind the growth of this first lodge, African Lodge No. 1, which then became African Lodge 459 under the Grand Lodge of England, that has kind of spurred this momentum, if I can say, this guiding light, where men of color who were not necessarily able in a easy fashion to become members of the Masonic fraternity for the obvious racial and disparate issues that we see in the history of America, they were able to find a solace, they were able to find that home, and they were able to grow not only with their stature within Freemasonry, but also within the community and the context through that umbrella of what Prince Hall was able to set as the guiding post for what has now become Prince Hall Freemasonry across the world.
That's fantastic. So, Brother Ryan Flynn, what brought this painting about? Was this something that you just wanted to, is this a project that was on your list, or how did this come about?
It actually was. So after I was a Masonic artist for a while, I realized that I needed to figure out how to do portraits. I had never been a portrait artist before because it's hard. It's very hard. And, there was the list of the famous Freemasons that I wanted to do eventually, Washington, insert famous Mason name here. And Prince Hall was on it. And I knew that there was no actual realistic portrait of him taken during his life. I knew most of them were kind of, to be frank, most of them, yeah, they were the whitest looking black man that you could find in colonial attire with a white wig, and my name's Kevin on his jacket, something like that. And I knew that wasn't right, so it was on my mind for a while. What started it was. I also belong to a Blackmer Lodge for 127 in North Carolina, and I think it was early 2020. There was a Prince Hall Lodge that burned down, a historic one in North Carolina, and I started thinking maybe I could help them with something, and now was the time. If I do a portrait or do something for this lodge. Maybe they can get on their feet again. And so I reached out to the Grand Master, called him up, and he was just on the phone with me kind of lackadaisical. Yeah, do a painting. That'd be great. Appreciate it. And then we kind of forgot about it for a little bit. So the first person I reached out was Brother Oscar. I said, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And he immediately said, we got to get Ken on board. And we started kind of figuring out what we wanted to do. And, over the next roughly a year, it was just fine tuning and tweaking until we got something that we liked.
That is fantastic, man. Fantastic. So, I had the pleasure being out there for Masonic Con in Ezekiel Bates Lodge. We did that little detour. Of course, everyone makes fun because that's where I got lost, and they found me at Prince Hall's grave. But phone dead an hour before my plane takes off. Why not? But being able to visit Prince Hall's grave was honestly quite the experience for me. I'd read a lot about the history and the individual, and I don't know, reading that and seeing it on paper is one thing. Standing in front of a man's tombstone is entirely another. And it definitely brought on a connection there that I was quite impressed with. And the memorial tombstone they have is epic, obviously, but it really hit me when I looked behind and saw the actual tombstone with him on the front, his wife on the back, and that was like, wow, move this thing aside. I gotta see this. So the legacy that he paved a way for in the craft today, in my personal opinion, I think has been the largest and the most important for the level ability of brotherhood in general. Do you guys think when he was going through what he went through, starting this endeavor into Masonry, that it would ever take and exist how Freemasonry is today, with Prince Hall and not entirely seeing eye to eye, but at least most of our grand jurisdictions are at the point of recognizing each other and having brotherhood existing there? Do you guys think that he would ever have imagined it coming to what it is today and hopefully continuing to grow?
I don't think he would have expected it to take so long. But then again, he, and not to speak, of course, on behalf of, but just these are my perceptions. His tenacity, his confidence, in his mindset from just reading about him and reading his own writings. He was just a go-getter. And a go-getter in all walks of life. He didn't matter what station in life, he was going to make things happen. And I think that's why that's such an inspiration for so many to realize that here in the 1700s, here's a group of men, with a charismatic leader and other leaders within themselves who, just try to make things happen for his people, and not just do it for the sake of having a title to sit on and be like, oh, look, I got this, and no one else get in, but actually literally utilizing it for public good. Pass on to Ken.
Absolutely. Again, if we look at it in the truest fashion, would Prince Hall recognize the Freemasonry of then with today? If we're just being honest, no, because it would be one Freemasonry, which is the one that he actually joined. But what you end up seeing is, the fractured status of what we call America's greatest sin, and that's that proverbial issue of race and
Sure,
the remnants of slavery. But going beyond that, we end up seeing that legacy of Prince Hall with social justice issues, being involved in government, having your people organized. That, and what I see in terms of what we consider, as a Prince Hall Mason, what we consider Prince Hall Freemasonry, that tradition has continued from not only then up until today, with the Thurgood Marshalls, with the John Lewis's, up until today, that legacy is still holding strong, still holding on to the true tenets of Freemasonry, where all men should be judged by the contents of their character, and we all meet on the level. So I do believe that in some means he would recognize it, but at the same time, in some means, I think he say we still got a little bit more work to do.
Oh yeah, definitely have work to do. I mean, I think that's in the essence of Masonry, right? You're always trying to smooth out that rough ashlar. In in the comment you made of split or divided Freemasonry in that sense, that is a good point. And I've had that conversation with Prince Hall brothers here and other brothers in quote unquote mainstream Masonry. In today's world, that it is looked at very oddly like that. And I've heard brothers in lodge before saying, why don't they just get rid of Prince Hall Masonry? We can all just be one. That's tough, right? Because Prince Hall Masons don't want to get rid of Prince Hall Masonry, same as we wouldn't want to get rid of our lodges. There's history, there's legacy, there's family, there's bond, there's experience there. But what gets me is the fact that we still look at it in the fact of, oh, that's Prince Hall Masonry and this is mainstream Masonry, instead of how we look at Kansas versus Missouri versus Virginia. We're just Grand Lodges. Prince Hall versus whatever you want to call mainstream Masonry. It's a struggle of a dividing point that I see, but I do definitely see that as a mental divide in a lot of people. They view them completely separate. So yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on that? I mean,
if I can hop in real fast.
Yeah.
I think it might have been you, Oscar, that may have said it. Prince Hall Freemasonry is mainstream Freemasonry. We come from the same well, literally the same well. And the turn that Prince Hall Freemasonry of today took is a part of American culture. It's just a part of our culture. It's, it's that thing that we still deal with from the beginning all the way until today. We are mainstream Freemasonry, like it or not, whether people want to accept that or not. But again, the turns that we had to take, the paths that we had to chart to get through this course where we are today, it's not a straight line, but we're all connected with anyone that considers themselves as Freemasons. We come from the same spring, and as we move forward, I think that that idea and that concept of we practice the same Freemasonry. There has to be a VSL. You initiate, pass, and raise your brethren. We have a Grand Lodge which gives out charters to subordinate lodges. So that entire idea of mainstream Freemasonry, which you don't hear overseas, versus
right
in America,
right,
it's this anomaly that we've created just because of our experiment in democracy, and that's just the reality of it. And I think that two's always better than one. Two's always better than one. But as long as we're headed down that same path, let's continue down that same path as brothers.
100%. It's a beautiful way to look at it, and I couldn't agree more. So in regards to the accuracy and history of this particular painting, I know, Brother Oscar, I think you said you had some slides. I don't know if we want to go ahead and throw those up and continue the conversation that way. Or
Sure, it'll help with the narrative here. Let's see.
While he's pulling that up, I'd just like to say that, I live in New Hampshire, right? So we don't have a Prince Hall Grand Lodge in New Hampshire. We have one obviously in Massachusetts down there. So for the first couple of years of Masonry, I had no idea what Prince Hall Masonry was. I had never heard of it because I was never exposed to it. And when I found out about it, I actually remembered being very disgruntled about it because it had to exist. And the reason I say that is, if you had told me the day I petitioned my lodge that Masonry was so segregated, to use the word, that Prince Hall Grand Lodges needed to exist in order for the stuff that we all take a vow to uphold, I probably would have told Freemasonry to pound sand and walk away. And through this project, it's allowed me to have a different viewpoint of Prince Hall and experience more discussions of it. I definitely went through the thought process when I first heard and, was still trying to understand what was going on here, that, why aren't we all in just one big lodge? But, I've heard some phenomenal discussions and been part of some great conversations that make me embrace what was just said. They are mainstream, and the fact that it's not treated as mainstream universally is an embarrassment, in my opinion. I know I'm not speaking as my Grand Lodge officer, and I'm speaking for me here, but that led me down the path of always wanting to do this portrait. It was just like, why the hell doesn't he have a portrait that does him justice? Because he sure as hell should. And it was just a thought process that was always in the back of my head.
Alex, is it showing now?
Yeah, it should be up on the main screen.
All right. So yeah, as Ryan kind of did the intro and the making of the portrait, and we kind of discussed, there are all these images that exist of Prince Hall, and they're all renditions. They're just someone's perspective or someone's, in some cases, wishful thinking. And in other cases, just trying, of course, to develop something to illustrate who this great individual was. But one of the things that you could see when Ryan had brought up the conversation, the first thing I think both Ken and I say, you're not going to have him in a wig, because black men weren't walking around Boston wearing wigs like George Washington and those other guys were, et cetera.
That idea was shot down real quick.
So, but it just goes to show it's this kind of transliteration of where and what the image were, of course, in maintaining the social uplift and trying to really come up with something that gave a much better perspective. And of course, a lot of this is based off of William Grimshaw, who has been notorious for fabricating a lot of stories about Prince Hall that unfortunately several folks have taken as the gospel, despite the fact that the evidence says otherwise. So just putting that in context, when you look at the images that exist that have been put out there, it's really interesting as far as why the effort came about. We had the mission, of course. You had Ryan, Ken, myself, trying to figure out how we can provide something of substance. And I'm going to pass this over to Ken, because this is one of the key points that was really important. Ken?
Yeah. So in 1788, the Columbian Pernisit publishes this article, and it spreads like wildfire throughout the Eastern Seaboard. And what ends up happening is the article that accompanies this actual the Columbian Pernisit article is actually a jab at the Black Freemasons of African Lodge. And when they originally published this article, it was more of a satirical introduction to talk about these Black Freemasons and all of this pomp and circumstance surrounding the Columbian Pernisit article. But once you read it, you actually start to get a view. And as a Freemason, when you go through this oration, you actually start to see how the lodge is set up. You actually see some of the articles within the lodge. You actually start to hear some of the historical framework in terms of Africa, in terms of art, in terms of literature, in terms of arts and sciences. And from the historian standpoint, when you actually look at this Columbian article, it says that the oration is given to the Grand Master, which is actually the Worshipful Master, and the Wardens and Brethren. And if you're actually a student of history, you'll, as a historian, the person that gives the oration is a gentleman by the name of John Morant, Reverend John Morant, who ends up studying in, I believe it's, I forget where he studied. Oh my goodness. I think he studies at Queen's College or St. John's College. He studies abroad, and he studies theology. and he ends up coming back to the States. But what's something that's very interesting about this article that I did a video on actually, and it talks about it. It talks about the man. This oration was actually given in Mandingo, in the Mandingo language, not in English, but it's published in English. So this is a very, very interesting article that actually, again, it goes as a snub to African Lodge, but as a Freemason, if you're reading it, you're saying, hold on, these guys, there's something in here. But when you read closer, even more so in an anthropological or a historical context, these guys are hitting on some very extremely amazing topics and some of the subjects that are going on in there in 1788, where these men were still considered chattel, even though they were free and not even Americans, but they were, what were they? So I'll let Oscar move forward with this, I guess, in this part of the discussion.
So part of the element in that was that, as Ken mentioned, it describes the layout of the lodge, and it was really a table lodge or a lodge of refreshment at the time where this oration was happening. So for us, we just when Ryan said, "Hey, I want to make a portrait," I'm like, you got to use the Colombian, because it actually describes how Prince Hall is presiding in the East and how all these brothers are around. And in this wire frame that this pencil frame that Ryan kind of drew up, it's like, okay, so should we just have him there, kind of recreate this kind of social setting, which really is described in a good totality that gives a perspective, and kind of like, okay, maybe this is how the portrait should come about. But as you know, it becomes real difficult because we don't know what his face really looks like. We know he's dark complected, as described in other places. So how do you manage and how do you walk through those elements while staying true to form? So from there, Ryan figured out, well, let's try to at least make sure when he is drawn, when he's painted, that his image does fit what is contemporary for African Americans in the 1700s. So, we know that they wore tricorn hats because everybody wore tricorn hats. We also see the description of, how he would look sitting in the East, and what are some of the elements that would make sense that were also similar to the 1700s kind of images that we see of other men of Masonic stature. So we're just walking you through some of the behind the scenes. I know Ryan is shirking because he never likes the behind the scenes to come out, but he has no control over this.
I do that. Oh God.
So another thing that was very important to recognize that every other year, within every 2 years, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Massachusetts does a reenactment of the opening of African Lodge. So looking true to form, here are these brothers, dressed in the colonial regalia to that extent, and so we wanted to keep it as true to form, even within the reenactment component of really illustrating that rich history and that storyline approach that has come from Prince Hall Freemasonry. So, Ryan started to kind of do all this framing, looking at the elements, and he was like, well, what should be in there? And Ken and I, we were going back and forth. Okay, this should be here, that should be there. Have this particular layout. Let's make it in a way that not only is he sitting in a Masonic posture of that being a worshipful master in the East as we're focusing on him, but the elements around him should also tell the story about who this man was and what he's been known to represent, and what any Mason, especially that of a Prince Hall Mason, would see and recognize and have some degree of pride in the presence of that. Ryan would tell you, and you want to jump in here as far as recognizing that it wasn't any individual's face in particular. Ryan, do you want to, before I jump to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, if it's really quite common if you look at historical paintings of historical figures that most of the time they just kind of guessed what they look like. The biggest painting you can think of right now is the famous painting of Christopher Columbus was painted 100 years after he died. Okay, unless they had really good memories that they didn't do it, so they really didn't know what he looked like. So with that in mind, I wanted his face not to be the most important thing in the painting. This was a painting of the essence of Prince Hall, not Prince Hall himself. So when I went to figure out what the face was going to look like, the way I work is I mock stuff up on my computer. I do sketches and stuff, and took some photos and just was trying. What you're seeing here is me trying to figure out lighting and how I want to light this. And eventually, I took a hodgepodge of 3 different faces and put it into a sketch that I held up and taped to the canvas while I was painting it. But again, the face really doesn't matter to me as long as that it, in essence, was a black man of that character, of that time frame. And the rest was really more important than everything else, down to the colors and the everything that's in the background. And I know Brother Oscar is going to talk more about that. So
we want to make sure that was stated because there's rumors going around that it was Ken and I who sat and pretended we were Prince Hall and the paintings were just images of us. We want to make sure that's dispelled. We don't need those rumors right now.
Yeah,
and, Ken.
As long as they don't think it's me.
Oscar had to have Ryan get rid of his dreads while he was sitting. So that happened. It was a thing.
So as if anything, it starts off with a blank slate, right? This is the canvas where the magic began. And as our good brother Ryan mentioned, he started off with his base and started building around and keeping us up to date as to, okay, here's where I got today. Here's where I am today. So though we were remote, we're able to physically see the growth. And of course, you'll hear, providing some context and, backseat driving painters, if you can, about things that
more like passenger seat driving, but that's
here,
Ryan, let me see it
for you.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. If I can, one thing that I really enjoyed about this project, I know we're still going through it, but and I have to commend Ryan for this. He's educating Oscar and I on even the posture, how the hands sit, what they mean. There's when you look at this, you're just seeing, okay, it's a guy sitting in a chair. It's a worshipful master sitting in a chair, holding a charter and a gavel as Freemasons. But as an artist, Ryan, can you just tell them, some of the I guess the esoteric conversations regarding how the composition, how he's sitting and where his hands are and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, with everything in the painting, I wanted to make sure that it had a meaning. So the background, what you saw here was actually based off of another painting of a statesman that I found. And I was like, that's the position I want him in. I want him sitting erect. He's kind of, he's proud. Usually when you see people, even though it's apparently not very welcome in a Prince Hall Lodge with their legs crossed like that, or their soles in paintings, especially around this time, that meant that he was in comfort, which means he was established. So a person who is able to relax at his chair like this is someone who has accomplished something in his life and is of stature enough where he can take a lackadaisical approach to getting his portrait taken. In the earlier versions of the painting, you're going to see he's holding this charter that Oscar's going to talk about. My original idea was him to hold it specifically like that because I had it acting as a level, that his charter was on the level with all the other charters that were out there. As I moved forward with the painting, I realized that it was not helping the composition. Composition's all about motion and making sure your eye moves across the canvas. That's why I have the curtains behind him moving in the same direction of his body so that it's pleasing to the eye as it walks by. And it also frames whatever's outside the window itself. So with all paintings of that era, everything in the painting had a meaning, and even the positioning and the colors, and especially you're going to see in all these photos, I really, really struggled with his expression. It's a very hard thing to paint. And I didn't want him to come off as goofy, obviously, but I didn't want him to come off as angry or anything like that. I wanted this resolute look on his face.
Yeah. And another thing that's really helpful, when just a play on some subtleties, Prince Hall, and this is one of the unfortunate rumors that has been developed over the course of time. People say, well, Prince Hall, he was a provincial Grand Master. He never was a provincial Grand Master. He was a past master, and he died as a past master. Of course, he's risen in stature in Prince Hall Freemasonry. So, posthumously, you could obviously say, yes, he is he could be grand. He is in essence, the Grand Master of all things Prince Hall. But he wasn't a Grand Master in the frame, or provincial in the way that we know historically. But that didn't mean we were going to negate his majesty to that extent, his attainment. Sure. So that's where you see the deep, rich purple, in addition to the blue, which is contiguous with that of the craft lodge and the work that he put into it. Now, what is also interesting is, as we mentioned, there are all these elements of things that are going to be cemented into the painting. So this interesting description here is from characterizing the assassination of 4 men by some British troops at the time, which essentially led to the Boston Massacre. What is interesting, the first man who died was an African brother, a man of African descent called Crispus Attucks, and this was just a number of years before the infamous charter was arrived, or I should say, their infamous first lodge was created in 1778. But the interesting component was how we knew Prince Hall knew of, because he's in Boston, they know of this particular incident, which was a driving force in the American Revolution, for lack of a better word. So this component is integrated on the table that sits right outside the window and under the charter. So we wanted to find ways. And what is also unique about this is the individual who we know who drew this particular image, which was later found in a newspaper column, was Paul Revere. So here you have all these interconnected parts. So we wanted to make sure that element was included, and it will appear, and you'll see it later on. Of course, as Ryan mentioned, this perspective of the charter. Now, this charter, needless to say, has been a bone of contention in American Freemasonry or American society for more than 200 years. And part of the fact of as Ken kind of pointed, the negative implications of our societal ills of telling someone that they did not exist, or this charter was not real, or it was ill-begotten. This charter is the same as many of the other charters that exist in continental America that permitted men to meet as Masons. And this was a charter that which was granted in 1784 by then the modern Grand Lodge, or the Grand Lodge of England at that time. So it was very much guaranteed that charter was going to be present in this portrait. And as you can see, as Ryan mentioned, it was appearing on his hand and held in his hand. And if you look very closely, you can see, how and on the papers drawn there, not only do you see those 4 coffins that illustrate the newspaper article with Crispus Attucks, but other writings that Prince Hall was very well known for, like including the petition that he wrote to free to get African Americans, free from slavery, or even return to Africa by virtue of trying their best to survive in the society. So we wanted to make sure the fact that he was an ardent writer and an avid writer was illustrated in this particular, as mentioned, the items around his persona. Now, as Ken mentioned, the pronosis, there was even in that description a description of a pyramidal cone. Now, most folks are like, well, wait, it's a pyramid. If you saw one of the earlier drawings, Ryan kind of drew a pyramid. And I'm like, it's not a pyramid. It's a cubic stone. Now, to European Freemasons, they know what a cubic stone is. To American Masons, we kind of focus on the perfect ashlar, and we forget the pyramidal top to that cubic stone. So this is actually one of the cubical stones that I got when I was in France. And I showed it to Ryan and company and Ken, to really show, like, no, this is something that Masons would have, because it was part of the Masonic lexicon at that time. So as you see now, the items are starting to grow. They're starting to really develop and really put into position and match what is described in that Colombian magazine and newspaper article that describes how those brothers were presenting themselves at that time. Then, as things got a little trickier, if you just going back for a minute, we got to the end where, Ryan was ready to go. He just has to finish everything out. And then we got a little bit of information. In particular, one of the brothers from Massachusetts had written a book about the archives of the African Lodge. And in it, he describes Prince Hall's apron that he wore while he was worshipful master. So the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts actually has this apron. And here you see it in one of their display rooms of African Lodge. And we were able to at least try to identify some more pictures of it. And we're going to get to this in a second. But one of the other elements was also the tracing board. Ryan wanted other things in the room to show that it was Masonic, and it wasn't just a guy sitting in a chair. So tracing boards in the 1700s were, especially from the modern Grand Lodge era, who was in communication with Prince Hall, we would understand that he would at least have a description and utilize that. And as I mentioned, when we got this image of his actual apron that he is known to have worn, we came back and said, stop the presses. You got to start all over again. And, Ryan was not happy. He was not happy.
It was the gavel that got me. I think you get to that later. I get to that.
I get to that one next. But the interesting thing about this apron, his widow, which you just mentioned, who was buried alongside of him, his widow actually held this apron for a while and turned it over to the brothers of that lodge. And they're able, in that book by the brother, were able to illustrate that they still had, and they verified that this apron did exist. So we're like, you got to have his apron on if that's the apron that he wore. And then one of the other elements, because Ryan spent a great deal of time and energy trying to infuse certain aspects of, things into the painting, and he was most especially proud of the gavel because he was able to, think, well, Irish Military Lodge or John Bat was Irish. He could put it in some pieces, and we had to say no. He actually had a ivory gavel, and as much as you have this nice intricate little gavel-y thing you got to make it into ivory. So he didn't like us at all. You can't have historians critiquing your work while you're
it wasn't that it had to be replaced. I get that. You were just like, just make a white one, and I was like, you got to kidding me.
So if you notice, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ken, go ahead.
And again, a part of, when you look at the picture, it's so many things going on inside of that frame that when you look at it, you got to go through each section, and there's something going on with each section. Even the picture of water, even the inkwell with the quill, the writings. You have the cubic stone. So many things are going on inside of this that, again, as just off of face, it's Prince Hall. He's sitting down. That's what you get. But when you start to get the story behind it of why that we consider that, the historical accuracy, his face matters not. It could have been a blank face, but it's the idea that we were able to really grab all of this information from a historical record and put all of that together. And the way that Ryan he had to deal with Oscar and I, and was able to put that on canvas. That within itself is amazing. And he still has his beard. So it's amazing that he was able to keep going with that.
Another quick item. So as he mentioned before, if you notice in the earlier components of the painting, there was the image outside. So what was going to be outside? So part of the argument or discussion, maybe it's Boston Harbor in the 1700s. The charter came in on a boat. Many of the Prince Hall Masons were maritime. They worked on ships, and he had that infamous thing where he was able to get some kidnapped brothers from a slaveholder, in the Dutch islands to send back. So, all these things. And then there's Faneuil Hall. If you were anyone in Boston, you were going to look for something that's a landmark, something that's easily recognizable. And of course, unfortunately, Faneuil Hall was associated with slave, markets, and even to that extent. So we were able to go even further and identify that Prince Hall did attend a church. And the reason why that's important, as you know, anyone who knows of Prince Hall Masonry, is that the growth of Prince Hall Masonry did go hand in hand with the growth of the Black church, the African American church, and he was a significant member of his church and his faith. And we were able to find a depiction of his church and the time period and he was there, and historically, benefit. And that was what we were able to decide on what should be in the window sill, what should be in the window pane. And I think that's even more striking because it also speaks to not only the volume of effort of the man that's within, but the man that's without, and illustrative, of course, of where Prince Hall Masonry is and how they have grown with respect to both the balance of the physical, the mental, as well as the spiritual. So that all said, we had to figure out a way, and Ryan was able to bring it down to North Carolina. I was able to attend and sit in. Unfortunately, I know Ken wasn't able to, but we were all there in spirit, where it was presented to the Prince Hall Grand Master of North Carolina by the then Prince Hall by the Grand Master of North Carolina, and Ryan and myself, where we give the description of what laid out this particular design, this portrait, and it was just so fitting to see it finally, come from an idea built with some frustrations, and really truly enhance that spirit of brotherhood. Because in the goal of getting this project done, I would say the three of us grew very, very close. We learned so much from each other, and it's part of a process of saying you could actually see the outcome of an idea and an outcome of why this is important, not to just make yet another painting of Prince Hall or say this one is the best, but to try to at least be historically accurate and contribute something of value to the community and to Sub-Valley as a whole. Because as we would always say, when Prince Hall died in 1807, the Prince Hall Freemasonry is American Freemasonry and American history and Masonic history as a whole. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues in case they have additional pieces they want to add.
I just forgive me, Alex. I still want to ask. I still want to ask Ryan. What was? Again, I love looking at it. I have my poster of it. What was your favorite parts of putting that together? And because seeing all those different pieces in there, and again, it's not the face for me. It's the minute details that you put in there. What was your favorite portion of that?
You're gonna laugh. The process of us, the edits, the frustrations, and getting close to you guys was the best part. It really was. It was a labor of love, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Honestly, this was the first painting I ever did where I was freaking out about it, like losing sleep over this. You can ask my wife about it. Like, there was parts of it when things weren't looking good or I was getting frustrated, I was not sleeping, and it was it was pretty stressful because I knew that if I did this right, it could mean a lot to a lot of people. So we joke all about those edits and erasing my amazing gavel and that sort of thing. But like, it was such a cool experience to work with you guys and become closer. It's what Masonry is all about, right? Honestly, giving that painting away is without question my top Masonic moment of my life, and I doubt I'll ever beat it. Just to see the look on DT's face when he got it was like, all right, I'm gonna cry now. So, but yeah, it's I'm so happy we did it, and I'm also really happy that you guys are getting as much credit with this as I am, because it was a team effort. I put the paint on the canvas. You guys told me what to do. So it would not have worked without you guys.
I appreciate it. Alex, I got to say thank you for even wanting to discuss it. A lot of people out there don't understand the significance of it, where we really appreciate the fact that you highlighted this and brought this out globally.
No, this is a conversation that has to happen. And, not to discount any of your work, Ryan, it's all phenomenal. But I have to say, when this one came out, it hit me the most. I was like, this is it. This is what Ryan's going to be known for right here. I mean, I didn't have the pleasure of being on that back end frustration and watching it go through everything that I just saw, which I'm sitting here blown away watching the stages of this. But seeing the progress reports that, Ryan would throw up on Facebook, I was waiting for him all the time. And I knew this was going to be a huge project, but I at least hope I share that when I saw that unveiling just through Facebook was a huge proud moment for me. This is a milestone in Freemasonry, but I guess the point that I love so much tonight, seeing this process, is I worked construction for a number of years, and I never understood how that mess of a field could come together in these beautiful buildings. I mean, every different crew in there had different blueprints, and those blueprints changed hour by hour, day by day, and no one else got notified. So it was always a mess. But in the end, somehow it came together. And I saw so much of that in this process tonight of, I don't even know how Ryan brought that to be, to have something on canvas and then be like, no, we got something better. How do you say no to that, first of all? Because it's got to be that accurate portrait. It's not going to be what you're going after. But how the hell do you make changes of that magnitude and still make it flow and work so beautifully? I get the other thing. No, go ahead.
Sandpaper.
That shocks me even more somehow. I don't know, man. You don't want to tell you what happened when he applied the glaze. He's like, oh crap, the glaze is messing up everything.
So what didn't make it to Facebook? So I let it dry, and I have to transport it, so I have to varnish it. And varnish, seals the painting. And I mixed up my varnish. I got it all ready. I put the painting down, and I just painted the varnish on, and the painting went gray. Like, it dried in a manner where it dulled the whole painting, destroyed it, to the point where I was almost going to have to start over. So I literally bought 2,000 foam Q-tips and 2 or 3 bottles of whiskey, and locked myself in the studio and had to clean the varnish off with Q-tips. Took me probably a month. I was not. You didn't want to be around. You did not want to be around.
People don't realize the labor of love that man did.
Exactly.
That labor of love that man did to get this done.
Yeah, I had no idea that even happened. And
I didn't tell anybody about that because
he wanted to put it behind him.
Now.
I can see that. Like, if it was me, I think I'd be the same way. Like, nobody's going to know about this. Yeah. But that's something people need to know about, because that's a testament to the skill and labor and love that you put into this. But one of the huge things.
And I'm sorry, Alex, we need to leave him alone during that time period. That was not the time to come out. Well, we think that. No, we'll leave him alone.
Ryan in about a month. I wonder what's going on.
It's like, can we move everything just an inch to the left?
The square isn't square. Oh, okay. Yep. Go ahead. Do your thing.
But he needs to be on a horse. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. After all, I like that table idea. Let's go ahead and do that. No, going in this tonight, one of the biggest questions in my mind was not knowing what Brother Prince Hall looked like, how you even bridge that gap of entering what are we going to make out of this face. And obviously the symbolism was huge when I saw the painting. It's even more hearing the research and stuff and just the intense detail behind it tonight. But it's so impressive. And I guess it kind of hit me hearing that the face could have been blank, because Prince Hall is that photo. That's his spirit, his essence, is everything you see there. And that hit me pretty hard there. I love that aspect of it. I'm also majorly impressed of the amount of stuff that you guys were able to pull up, historically accurate, to place in here to really bring out the essence of Prince Hall, show who he is, but also that you're able to classily put so much of that in there without it looking like an episode of Hoarders. Like, that also blows my mind, because it flows so well. It's perfect.
And even speaking about the face, there's a piece that I guess Ryan didn't, he's always going to be shy to the extent, but when you think about the historical context, and when you like, what does someone look like, and how old was he at the time? And we knew that he wasn't an 18-year-old, 19-year-old. He wasn't like, he was, middle-aged or, middle into that regard. So Ryan actually worked on making sure that aging worked in a way that while we say black don't crack, they at least have a potential of making sure that his image is still one that shows he's been through stuff. He's been through a lot, but he also is a man of status and a man of stature and a man of growth. So I think that was something for me that I always admired, that, after he doled it up and did the composite, then he started touching it up. And I thought that was really something remarkable that, not a lot is said about.
100%. And as we're moving into our toast here, before I forget this thought, because it deserves to go as a forefront piece here. Ryan mentioned this, that he may have put the ink, or I guess paint, on the canvas here, but like literally this could not have come to what it is without all three of you working together. And it's a beautiful aspect. I mean, we can see this in Masonry through and through with ritual. We can have a brother that's just the best ritualist ever, but if that ritual wasn't written, it wouldn't have came across and impacted, our brother Masons the way it does. If the three of you had not come together for this project, it would not be what it is, and would not be, the milestone and the landmark that hopefully it will continue to be for years. So you guys, I applaud you, seriously. You've brought this to the forefront where it just needs to be celebrated for time to come. So I could not do an episode on this. I've been looking forward to it for some time.
I mean, we
appreciate it.
So I speak for everyone else, but we didn't go in this looking for for that. I think it was to contribute what little we knew, to advise, and to help support a brother trying to do something right, and just to make sure that we can lend that hand. And that's why there was no ego involved, because it's like, okay, Ryan said, it's like, Ken got to be on the project. Ken's on the project. I'm not on the project. Ken, you're on this project. Okay. And just the way we're working together.
What am I doing now? What am I doing now? But the one good thing I have to say about this is, even though this was a project, I didn't know Ryan from Adam, from Adam. And because of this, again, the bond of Freemasonry, even though our Grand Lodges don't recognize each other, we have some of the deepest conversations in Facebook Messenger that America needs to be having. Some of the hard conversations. And again, this is what this fraternity is about. And like I said, I appreciate Oscar for recommending me to this and getting a chance to meet Ryan and see him do his art, because again, inside of that painting is so much to be unpacked. And if a person sees it and then they have the Colombian pronounce it right next to it, and they read that, and they can start to put things together, it's so much in there to unpack. But again, kudos to you guys, and you did an excellent job, Ryan.
Yes, sir, you did.
Well, being at the or just past the 9 o'clock hour here, brothers, if you don't mind, Brother Oscar, would you mind to offer up a toast? I think it would be in good favor to our brother Prince Hall this evening.
Our toast to our brother Prince Hall, one of thanks, one of gratitude, one of inspiration, and one of aspiration. We hope we did justice. We thank you for your brotherhood and for your leadership, and we hope that we have done a good enough job to hopefully have you smiling in that great celestial lodge on high. to brotherhood, fellowship, and relief from brotherly love and truth.
You're here. Cheers.
Cheers.
So the big question, Brother Ryan, I know this painting was gifted off. Are there prints available of it?
Yes. If you go on my website, ryanjflynn.com, there's limited edition numbered prints there, and you can also buy prints at masonicrevival.com as well.
Fantastic. So, brothers, be sure to check that out. We will get those links in the show descriptions on the various platforms this is going out in, so you'll be able to click on that and hopefully grab yourself a copy of this. Needs to be celebrated. I've got one of Ryan Flynn's paintings in my front room, and this one's coming soon, so it just has to go on the wall. Let's see. We got a couple comments here that I want to throw up real quick. One from a longtime fan, and he's been on the show several times with us. Brother Maddox here came on earlier. There it goes. He said, the black George Washington image always bothered me. Never felt it was anywhere close to accurate. Never liked it.
Yeah.
Understood.
Can you?
Understood. We totally understand, and we totally understand, and that's one of the big things that I think all of us as a collective wanted to stay away from. That using that George Washington image and then regurgitating it, and again, Ryan, the way that Ryan worked on that, because he said, I don't want anybody to sit for it. I don't want anybody to sit for it because I don't want anyone saying that's XYZ person. And he was absolutely right. It was great. It was a great thing.
I think the whole project started off with you saying, see this, Ryan? Don't do that.
And on the George Washington thing, especially in many of the lodges across the country, especially with the George Washington Masonic Memorial, most lodges have some image of George Washington in also a rendition, that wasn't really made. But one of the things I know in my own mother lodge, I gifted my copy of my print to my lodge, and in the East, brothers are always telling me, in the East, you go in, you see George Washington, you see Prince Hall right next to each other. We have a Prince Hall lodge that meets in our building as well. But every time I go in there, it's just brothers say it's a sense of pride to know that we have these two pillars of American Freemasonry side by side, despite which talks so much to the progress that we still have to make and can make for generations to come.
Let's see here. We got two more here I'd like to highlight. This brother says, French here says, what a privilege to come across this podcast tonight. Been able to watch and listen to these brothers behind such a great historic accomplishment. And I have to echo his words so deeply there. And then we had another one come through from Brother Maddox again that I wanted to highlight here. He said, we have a print nicely framed and hanging in the west of our lodge. So how cool is that?
Thank you, brother.
Well, brothers, coming at the end of the show here, we've covered a lot. You guys have blown my mind with the amount of work that went into this, the amount of thought. I sincerely applaud the three of you. I thank the three of you for really just going through the labors of this to make it what it is. And I pray that people see the effort that went into this and appreciate it to the level that it deserves to be appreciated. With that in mind, is there anything else you guys would have changed about it at this point?
Needs to be on a horse.
Absolutely not.
I can see the sweat building on Ryan's forehead right now.
We'll talk to you behind the scenes.
Yeah,
there you go.
No, I will say this is something I want to see changed about this painting right now. The fact that the three of us can't sit and lodge together and talk about this together, that needs to change. That's what needs to change about this painting right now. Because the moment that happens, it's happening. We're getting together and we're going to sit and lodge and we're going to give each other a big hug and it's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But, I will say, even though some of our jurisdictions have not caught up to that. The beautiful thing is that we can still come together in platforms like this, the four of us, and have that Masonic experience together. We can bypass those outdated precepts that some of our jurisdictions have and bridge it with pure brotherhood. So I thank the four of you for coming on and having a brotherly conversation about this tremendous work you've done. I want to give you guys a chance for any final thoughts you might have about this topic.
Good to go. I'm good to go. Again, this is an amazing exercise in art, in history, and in brotherhood and what Freemasonry is about. And it's been an amazing, it was an amazing journey to see that end product come out.
My word, I would say, I totally echo what my colleagues have and brothers have mentioned. My one admonition is I tell folks, we did not gain any royalties for our participation, but that's fine. So what I really mean to say is don't download it off Facebook and print it on a LaserJet. Buy a print. It looks much better that way, because it really is remarkable to sit and see and watch and absorb, because of the intricacy and the details that Ryan was able to accomplish with his great talent, which they teach us in Freemasonry, right? Just use their talents to the best ability. So thank you again for this opportunity to be on your podcast.
Thank you. Brother Ryan, you got anything?
Again, just echoing what a great opportunity and experience this all was. It life-changing, really was. I just put it out there that just because I can paint doesn't mean or that I'm the only person who can do stuff like this. We all owe a debt to this fraternity for providing what it does provide for us. Use your talents and do something like this in your own way. It's not that hard. You just got to do it. So get out there.
100%. So again, guys, thank you all so much for coming on this evening. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you guys. I can think just from talking to you guys and think of 20 different topics. So I really hope to get you guys back on here to talk some more. To echo what Brother Oscar said, I hope this episode and seeing everything that was gone through to build this work of art into what it was, that it deserves not to be downloaded. As Brother Oscar said, get the print, support it, and enjoy it in its purest and highest quality fashion. So it definitely deserves to be on the be on the wall in all of our lodges. So I hope you guys definitely check out the websites, and we'll get the links in there for those. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining in, and thank you, brothers, so much for taking part in this episode and bringing all the wealth of knowledge that you have.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Thanks,
brothers.
Alex.
Thanks,
Thank
Alex.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.